That bubbling sound meant the day was starting. It meant someone was awake. It meant everything was okay. You didn't know that, of course. Not at 7 years old, lying in the dark of your bedroom, the covers pulled up to your chin, the house still holding the particular silence that belongs only to very early morning. That deep cottony quiet before the world asks anything anyone. You didn't analyze the sound. You didn't think about what it meant. You simply heard it, rising from somewhere down the hall, from the kitchen, from the floor below, and something in your chest. Something you wouldn't have had words for then and might struggle to find words for even now. Settled. Relaxed. Exhaled. Pop. Daru. Pop. Pop. Dot. Dot. Pop. Dot. Daru. It was the percolator. And in the homes of a generation, in kitchens across America, across Canada, in the terraced houses of England, in the fibro cottages of Australia, in every house where a family woke to the smell of real coffee and the sound of someone who won, loved them already awake and working on the morning. That sound was the first true voice of the day. Not the alarm clock, not the radio. Not the radio, not a human voice. The percolator. Low, rhythmic, patient, percussive, like a heartbeat, like a promise. Close your eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, just to remember. Can you hear it? Even now. After all these years, after all the quiet drip machines and the sleek pod brewers and the electric kettles that make no sound worth remembering, can you hear the percolator? The way it started slow and uncertain, like something waking up itself, one soft pop, then another, then a gathering of purpose, a quickening. Can you hear the way the rhythm built until it found its pace? That steady, confident percussion that every adult in the house recognized instantly, because they knew. Every parent who ever stood in a dark kitchen in the early morning, still in their robe, still moving slowly, brain not yet fully assembled, they knew by listening. Not by looking at a clock, not by reading a gauge. They listened. The sound told them everything. There was a trick to knowing exactly when the coffee was ready, not by looking, but by listening. And every adult in the house learned it by heart. And there was one small, often overlooked part of the percolator that, if lost or forgotten on a particular morning, rendered the whole machine useless. A piece so simple, so modest in its construction, that its absence on those rare mornings felt almost like a betrayal of the entire ritual. But we'll come back to both of those. Because first, we need to go back to the kitchen. We need to go back to the beginning. We need to go back to the dark. It is 1963, or 1965, or 1961. Daughter, the year doesn't matter much. The mornings were nearly identical. The kitchen is quiet and dim, lit perhaps by the small light above the stove, or by the pale pre-dawn filtering through the window above the sink. The linoleum floor is cool. The refrigerator hums. And on the counter, on the same spot it has occupied for years, marked, if you looked closely, by a faint ring burned into the formica, a small permanent signature of all the mornings before this one, sits the percolator. It might be a General Electric, brushed aluminum, a wide, confident base, the chrome band around its middle catching what little light the kitchen offers. It might be a Sunbeam, with its elegant curves and that satisfying click of its detachable cord at the base. It might be a Westinghouse, or a Corey, or a Universal, all of them chrome or aluminum, all of them substantial, all of them designed to look as modern as the decade itself. as forward-looking, as capable. They sat on counters like small monuments to American domestic life. And they were exactly that. Or perhaps your family used a stovetop model. The clear Pyrex flameware percolator, through whose glass walls you could watch the entire drama of the coffee. The water heating, the column of liquid rising, the spray darkening the grounds, as though the percolator were not merely making coffee, but performing it. A small, transparent theater on the stove burner, or the corningware with its blue cornflower pattern, stovetop to table without apology, one of those objects so well designed and so thoroughly present in mid-century kitchens, that even now the sight of a blue cornflower on white ceramic cup and stop a person in an antique store and hold them there, suspended between the present and a morning 50 years ago. Whatever the model, whatever the brand, the process was the same. Water in the bottom, cold water, measured, poured in the previous evening or in the early morning dark. A perforated metal basket sitting on a vertical tube that rose from the bottom of the pot, and into that basket, measured carefully, the ground. The medium grind, not too fine, and the ground slipped through the perforations and clouded the coffee. Too coarse and the water passed through without conviction, producing something thin and apologetic that nobody wanted. The right grind, the right amount, and the old tin measuring scoop that lived in the coffee canister, and had lived there so long it had taken on the permanent smell of the grounds. These were part of the ritual, as fixed and necessary as anything else. The coffee itself. Do you remember? 8 o'clock coffee. The red bag from the A&P Maxwell House, with its slogan about being good to the last drop. Folgers, whose commercials would promise that the best part of waking up was their coffee in your cup, a promise that millions of American mornings took as simple fact. Hillsborough, Chase, and Sanborn. The coffee came in cans, often red and gold and green, substantial tins that lived in the cupboard or on the counter and held enough for the week. When the can was empty, some families saved it. A coffee can was useful. You always kept a couple. And then the lid with its small glass or metal knob at the top. That tiny dome, that modest jewel, that window into the pot's interior, through which you could watch the coffee bubble up with each cycle of the percolation, watch the liquid de-darken from golden to amber to a rich, deep brown as the brewing progressed. The lid was placed, the cord was plugged in, or the pot was placed on the burner, and the flame was lit. And then the waiting began. Do you remember the waiting? It seems strange now, in a world where everything is fast and faster and nearly instant, to remember a time when you stood in the kitchen and simply waited for the coffee. Not scrolling through something, not checking anything, just standing, or sitting at the table, present in the particular way that early morning demands of us, before the day has made its claims. Waiting, listening, and then the first pop. It was always a small surprise, even when you were expecting it. A single soft percussion from inside the pot. Then silence. Then another. Pop, dot, ball. A pause that seemed to hold its breath. Pop, pop, dot, dot. And the rhythm began to find itself, slow and tentative at first, like a musician warming up, like an engine turning over in cold weather, gathering. The sound was not loud. It was never loud, but it was present in a way that few sounds in a household ever were. It had intention. It had direction. It was going somewhere, and it was taking the morning with it. The sound traveled, That was perhaps its most remarkable quality. The way it moved through the house, finding its way down the hall, seeping under bedroom doors, rising through the floorboards of a house where the kitchen was below. Children heard it before they were fully awake. Teenagers heard it through the particular fog of adolescent sleep. A spouse still in bed heard it and pulled the blanket a little tighter. Not yet, just a few more minutes, but knowing with a comfort that required no conscious thought, that someone was already in the kitchen, that the coffee was already on, that the day was under construction. Can you still hear it? Not a vague sense of it, but the specific rhythm of your specific percolator, in your specific kitchen, in the house where you grew up. Was it a fast pop, pop, pop that came in quick clusters, urgent and purposeful? Or was it slower, more stately? A measured bubble that seemed to take its time and was entirely unconcerned with hurrying. Every percolator had its own rhythm. Every percolator had its own personality. And if you lived with one long enough, and you did, they lasted for years, for decades, with perhaps an occasional replacement of the basket or the stem. You knew its rhythm the way you knew a family member's walk or laugh. It was as individual as a voice. The smell came next, or perhaps it came at the same time as the sound, because in memory they are inseparable. The sound and the smell, the percussion and the aroma, arriving together in the dark hallway of the half-asleep mind. Percolated coffee had a smell unlike anything that has been produced in a kitchen since. It was stronger than drip coffee, richer, doryuja, more assertive. It had a slight bitterness to it that was not unpleasant, but was deeply, specifically coffee. Not a suggestion of coffee, not a polite knock on the door of the morning, but a full and unapologetic announcement. The smell filled the house completely. It went into the curtains, into the upholstery, into the very walls of the kitchen, so that on mornings when the coffee wasn't made, there was still a ghost of it there, a memory of 1,000 mornings embedded in the plaster and the paint. Mixed with the smell of coffee came the other smells of the early morning kitchen. Toast browning. Bacon beginning to sizzle in the cast iron pan. Now, Maggie, he threw. Just, Ibera, gone through here, tall, orange juice. Sometimes freshly squeezed. The halved oranges lined up on the counter. Sometimes from the can of frozen concentrate dissolved in the right amount of water and stirred briskly. And underneath all of it, or perhaps surrounding all of it, the clean smell of the morning itself, the fresh air coming through the window cracked above the sink, carrying with it the particular scent of whatever season held the household. The dampness of an autumn morning, the cold clarity of a winter dawn, the first green suggestions of spring, the lazy warmth of summer. The percolator sat in the middle of all of this and sang its steady song. Now, Osan Pressry, Nexarda, now brawls. The trick, the thing that every adult learned, that passed not through instruction, but through daily, patient observation, lived in the sound itself. When the percolator first began, the pops were slow and separated by long pauses. This was the early stage, the water heating, the first tentative rises up the tube, the grounds just beginning to receive their baptism. This stage was patient. It could not be hurried. If you tried to pour from the pot in this stage, you would get something pale and thin and apologetic. Hot water with memories of coffee. Nobody wanted that. So you waited. As the minutes passed, and in a percolator, minutes were meaningful. They were not merely a number on a countdown, the rhythm accelerated. The pops came faster, closer together. 2 in quick succession, then 3, then a brisk, confident staccato that filled the kitchen with its own music. This was the middle stage, the building stage, the stage where the color through the glass knob was deepening from pale gold to amber to something approaching the rich darkness of real coffee. The smell was building too, intensifying, filling the room with a warmth that was as much emotional as it was physical. And then, and this was the trick, this was the thing you had to know. There was a moment when the sound reached a particular, steady, purposeful beat. Not frantic, not desperate, just steady and sure and right. Pop, 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 in a rhythmic progression, like a tiny mechanical orchestra at the peak of its performance. That was the moment. That was when the coffee was ready. Every person who lived with a percolator long enough knew this sound the way a musician knows a resolved chord. You heard it, and your hand was already reaching for the cup. Because if you waited beyond that moment, if you let the percolator run too long, if you walked away and got distracted by the radio, or a child needing something, or a glance out the window at the weather, the rhythm changed again. It quickened past readiness into something else, something urgent and wrong, a frantic boiling that was no longer brewing but punishing. The coffee in that state was bitter, over-extracted, dark not with richness, but with regret. Every family had experienced it at least once, that morning when someone left the percolator on too long, and the coffee that came out was sharp and acrid, and everyone at the table could tell, and nobody said anything, but everyone registered anything, read it. It was one of the minor dramas of the domestic morning, but when it was right, and most mornings it was right, the pour was a ceremony all its own. The pot was heavy when full, substantial, ... You felt the weight of the water, the brewed coffee, the metal body, all of it gathered together in that broad, graceful form. The chrome pot was warm to the touch, almost hot. You needed a folded dish towel, or a pot holder, or the practiced grip of someone who had done this every morning for 15 years and knew exactly where to hold it and how. The spout released a thin, precise stream of coffee that was almost black, darkly transparent, in a way that only percolated coffee ever was, catching the kitchen light as it fell into the cup. The first cup was always the strongest. The percolation process meant that the coffee at the bottom of the pot had been through the cycle the most times, had been extracted the most thoroughly, had accumulated the deepest concentration of the ground's offering. Some people saved this first pour for themselves, the parent who woke earliest, who deserved it. Some poured it back in and swirled the pot to even out the concentration. But if you were the first one up, and you poured that first cup of freshly perked coffee, and you wrapped your hands around the thick ceramic mug, because the thick ceramic mug was important, the coffee tasted different in a thin cup. You knew this, and you raised it, and breathed the steam in before the first sip. Then you had something that no automatic machine has ever precisely reproduced. The steam rose. The mug warmed your hands. The kitchen was quiet, except for the percolator's slow-fading rhythm. Still going, keeping the coffee hot on its warming setting, ready for the rest of the house when it arrived at the table. Do you still remember the exact rhythm of your childhood percolator? And can you hear it in your mind's ear, right now? Perhaps you were the first one up some mornings. Perhaps you were old enough, 12 or 14, to have been trusted with the percolator, the filling. Missing. The lid, the plug, and you felt the particular height. Errance woke. Perhaps you set it going and sat at the table and listened to the sound build and poured the first cups and called out that coffee was ready and felt, for a brief and shining moment, like you were already someone who managed mornings, took care of people, who understood what it meant to be awake first and prepare something warm for those who were still sleeping. Or perhaps you were never the one who made the coffee. Perhaps you were always on the receiving end. The child who woke to the sound, the teenager who stumbled to the table and found a cup already poured and waiting. The partner who lay in bed a few extra minutes because the sound from the kitchen meant you didn't have to move yet. The day was already being handled. And if that was your experience, then you know something particular about the percolator that has nothing to do with coffee at all. You know what it meant to wake to a sound that was someone else's labor and someone else's love, already in motion, already warm, already there before you were. Who made the coffee in your house? And did you ever thank them for that first sound of the morning? In most households of the era, it was the mother. She had often set up the percolator the night before, filled it with cold water, measured the grounds into the basket, assembled the stem and the basket and the lid, and left it on the counter with the cord coiled beside it, ready for more. In Sheol. And all she had to do in the dark of 5:30 or 6 o'clock was plug it in. She moved through the kitchen quietly in those first minutes, not wanting to wake anyone yet, not quite ready for the noise of the family, performing these small acts of preparation in a silence that was almost meditative. The click of the socket as the cord connected, the tiny red eye of the power light illuminating. The weight. There is something in that image. A woman in a housecoat in a dark kitchen, standing at the counter with one hand resting near the warm body of the percolator, listening for the first pop, looking out the window at the beginning of another day. That holds more meaning than any single image should be able to carry. The patience of it, the dailiness of it, the absolute, unquestioned love of it. She did this every morning without exception, without acknowledgement, without anyone thinking to remark upon it, because it was simply what mornings were, and how they began, and who began them. She made the coffee. The sound of the coffee being made was the sound of the household being held together, the sound of someone tending to the ordinary needs of the people she loved, the sound of a life organized around the warmth of the table and the preparatory ion of the day. But fathers made the coffee too. In some houses, it was the father who rose first, who stood in his robe by the counter, the plaid robe or the dark terry cloth one, the one with the fraying cuffs, and who listened to the percolator with the focused patience of a man acute, stoned to waiting for things, for work to begin, for children to stop needing, for the coffee to be ready. He stood there without doing much else, just waiting, present, participating in the morning in the only way the morning asked of him at that particular moment. And there was something so completely him about the way he stood there, hand around the mug before it was filled, the steam of the percolator rising around him, the dark kitchen slowly lightening. A man at 6 a.m. waiting for coffee was a man in his most unguarded state. And for the children who saw it, who came downstairs in their pajamas and found him there, solid and familiar, and still in the private hour before the day had demanded his public self, it was a sight that settled into memory and stayed there. Now, the small part, the overlooked piece. Inside the percolator, the stem rose from the center of the base, through the water, and connected at the top to the basket that held the grout. This stem, a slender metal tube, simple in its purpose, entirely without glamour, was also removable, and also necessary. Without it, the water had no path to travel upward, no column through which to climb and reach the grounds. The physics of percolation depended on it entirely, and the basket, too, perforated and small, sitting above the stem. If that basket were set aside while washing and left on the dish rack and not put back, or if the stem were left in the sink and forgotten on a busy morning, then the percolator was assembled wrong, and the coffee that came out was not coffee at all. It was just hot, slightly tinted water, faintly embarrassing, deeply unsatisfying. The first time you made coffee wrong, the first morning you assembled the pot in the dark by feel and habit and got it wrong. You didn't know until the pour. The color was pale, the smell was thin. You looked at the pot. You opened the lid. You saw the basket sitting separately from the stem, or the stem lying forgotten on the counter, and you understood what had happened, and the particular frustration of it had its own flavor, its own texture, because it was entirely your fault, and entirely preventable, and you had done it anyway. Everyone did it at least once. The percolator required your attention, not constant attention, but intermittent, careful attention. The checking of the pieces, the proper assembly, the listening for the right sound. It was not a machine that would compensate for your inattention. It was a machine that rewarded presence and punished absence, that asked only for the courtesy of being assembled correctly, and in return produced something extraordinary. That extraordinary thing, that cup of correctly perked coffee, dark and rich and strong, poured into a thick mug and taken to the table where the morning's business began, was the center of the domestic day. Coffee was not a peripheral activity. Coffee was not a fuel consumed in transit. Coffee was a gathering. It brought people to the table. It extended conversations. It was offered to every guest as the first act of welcome. I'll put the coffee on. A phrase that meant more than its literal content, that meant sit down. You're expected here. This house is a place where people are welcomed and fed and cared for. The guest who arrived in the morning or after dinner was offered coffee as a matter of course. The percolator was filled and assembled and set going, and the guests knew they were being hosted with real intention, because the percolating sound was audible in the living room, and the smell moved through the house to find them. And there was the wait, that unhurried, comfortable wait that was itself a kind of hospitality, a signal that this house did not rush things, that you were worth waiting for. At the office, the percolator sat on a table in the break room or on the secretary's desk, its presence as fundamental as the typewriter or the telephone. The sound of it was part of the office soundscape, the clatter of keys, the bell of a carriage return, the ring of a phone, and underneath all of it, the steady, reassuring pop of the percolator making its way through another pot. The coffee was poured into paper cups or ceramic mugs, carried to desks, set beside stacks of paper and filing trays. It was strong and hot, and it tasted exactly like the coffee at home, because it was exactly the same process, the same physics, the same patient building of heat and pressure and time. In church halls and community centers, the giant percolator urn, taller than a child, capable of making coffee for 50 or 100, sat on its own table, flanked by stacks of cups and containers of cream and sugar. The sound it made was the sound of the percolator scaled up, louder and more confident, a room-filling percussion that said this gathering had been prepared for, that someone had arrived early to fill the urn and set it going and wait for tea. A rhythm to build. The coffee from those great urns tasted slightly different from home coffee, slightly more institutional, slightly less personal, but it was unmistakably percolated coffee, and the smell of it in a church hall or a community center was the a smell of belonging, of being somewhere that expected you and had made preparations. The glass knob on the lid was not technically necessary for the coffee to brew. The percolation would have occurred with a metal knob, with a simple catch, with anything that closed the lid securely. But the glass knob, that small transparent dome pressed into place on the top of the lid, gave you something that mere function could not provide. It gave you sight. Through that small window, you could watch the coffee cup. You could see the liquid rising in small, irregular spouts, catching the light, falling back, rising again. You could watch the color change, palest gold to amber to the rich dark tone that meant ready. The glass knob was the percolator's confession, its small act of transparency, its way of letting you see what was happening inside. Children found it endlessly fascinating. They would stand on tiptoe to watch, or press their faces close, eyes wide, as though witnessing something genuinely marvelous. And they were. Chemistry and heat and gravity, doing their quiet work, producing something hot and dark and wonderful from simple water and ground beans. On the stovetop Pyrex flameware model, this transparency extended to the entire pot. You could see everything. The full column of water rising, the grounds being saturated, the coffee darkening as it filtered back through. The whole process visible through the clear glass body of the pot and the clear glass dome. It was coffee as spectacle, coffee as education, coffee as a small daily science experiment conducted in the kitchen every single morning. Children who grew up with the flameware on the stove understood intuitively how the percolator worked. They could see it working, and this understanding became part of the larger education in how things were made and where things came from. And what patience and heat and the right materials could produce from simple ingredients. The weight, the sound, the smell, and finally, the pour, the moment when the perking slowed again, not the frantic over-perking of a pot left too long, but the natural slowing of a pot that had done its work, that had reached the completion of its cycle, that was now simply keeping warm. This simply keeping warm. This moment was the signal. The pot was ready. The coffee was ready. The morning was ready. You lifted the pot with the towel or the pot holder, or with the practiced bare-handed confidence of someone who had done this so many times that their hands knew the heat tolerance of the chrome body without being told. You poured. The stream of coffee was dark and thin and steady, and it steamed as it fell into the cup. And the cup was warm already from being rinsed under the hot tap, because a cold cup cooled the coffee too fast, and nobody wanted that. You poured, and the kitchen filled with the smell of the fresh brew, stronger than the ambient percolating smell had been, concentrated, immediate, personal. The first cup was yours, or the first cup was for the one who needed it most, or the first cup was set aside for whoever had woken first and would be down in a moment. The cream was added, real cream from the small cream pitcher, or whole milk from the bottle or the carton, and the dark coffee blossomed into lighter shades of brown as the cream swirled through it, finding its own patterns in the warmth of the liquid. Some took sugar, some did not. The spoon clinked gently against the inside of the mug. The morning absorbed the sound. You can still taste that first cup, can't you? Darker and stronger than anything we drink today, with that particular bitterness that was not a flaw, but a characteristic. The taste of real coffee, of a process that made no apologies for being thorough. It was the taste of morning. It was the taste of the kitchen at 6 a.m. It was the taste of the table and the newspaper folded beside the plate, and the radio murmuring the weather from the counter, and the sun beginning to find the windows. And then one morning, it might have been 1973 or 1975, or somewhere in that decade when everything that had been fixed and certain in the domestic world began its quiet renegotiation. Someone brought home a new machine. It was smaller than the Percolator, simpler in its appearance. It had a filter and a carafe and a warming plate. It made coffee by passing hot water once through the grounds, slowly, by gravity. No cycling, no repetition, no building drama. It was marketed as better, as producing a less bitter cup, as being easier and more modern and more appropriate for the new decade. Mr. Coffee, endorsed by Joe DiMaggio, introduced in 1972, told America that the future of morning coffee was clean and efficient and quiet. And America, as it often does with new things promising ease, listened. The drip coffee maker was faster. In some technical sense, it was simpler to operate. It did not require the same degree of listening, the same familiarity with sound and rhythm, the same patient presence in the kitchen. You put in the water, you put in the filter and the grounds, you pressed a button, and it produced coffee. No sound worth mentioning, no percussion, no building rhythm that told you the morning was underway. Just a hiss and a trickle, and then coffee in the carafe. The percolator was moved to the back of the cupboard. It happened in different households in different years, but it happened everywhere eventually, the way all transitions happen, not with ceremony, but with the gradual accumulation of new mornings that didn't require the old way. The old chrome pot sat behind the new machine, then was moved to a higher shelf, then was taken to the church rummage sale, or given to a family member, or placed in the garage, and eventually forgotten. It left without announcement. It left while everyone was busy with the new, and the sound left with it. The kitchens of the late 1970s and the 1980s grew quieter in the mornings. Efficient and quiet. The drip machine trickled and hissed, produced its coffee, fell silent. There was no progression of sound, no building rhythm, no moment of arrival that the ears could recognize and interpret as a message from the morning. The coffee was simply there, or it wasn't. The machine was either on or off. It had nothing to say about the process. It did not make the morning audible. And perhaps we didn't notice right away. Or perhaps we noticed, but told ourselves it was a fair trade. Better coffee, they said. Less bitter, cleaner, more nuanced. Perhaps for a while that was sufficient. But something had been removed from the morning that was not just a sound. Something had been removed from the kitchen that was not just an appliance. The percolator's rhythm had been a form of communication between the machine and the household, between the person making the coffee and the people who heard it, between the present morning and all the mornings that had gone before. It said, "I am here." It said, "The day is beginning." It said, "Someone is already awake and taking care of this." The drip machine said nothing. When did you last hear a real percolator perk? And do you miss it as much as the quiet mornings it defined? Perhaps you still have one. Perhaps it lives in a cabinet, brought out for camping trips, or for the rare occasion when someone remembers it. Perhaps you have your mother's old sunbeam, or your grandmother's stovetop flameware, And sometimes you take it down and fill it, and plug it in, or set it on the burner, and you stand in the kitchen and you wait. And the first pop comes. That single, tentative percussion, just as it always was. And something in you that you had not known was waiting for it responds immediately, without hesitation, without needing to think about why. Because it is not just a sound. It never was just a sound. It was the sound that meant the house was inhabited, that someone had risen before you and taken the first steps of the day on behalf of everyone who was still sleeping. It was the sound of ordinary devotion, not grand gestures, not declarations, but the daily, unannounced labor of care that built a life and held it together morning after morning. It was the sound of a parent in a robe standing at a counter at 6 a.m., performing the same ritual they had performed 500 mornings in a row, asking nothing in return for it, except perhaps a quiet moment with the first cup before the fourth. Family descended. You can still hear it, can't you? Right now, in the quiet of your memory, the glass knob bubbling, the smell reaching your bedroom before you were fully awake, the sound getting stronger, more certain, building its steady percussion, until it arrived at that perfect, purposeful rhythm that every adult in the house could read like language. Weight of the pot in your hands, the steam rising from the first cup, the kitchen warming around it all, the morning assembling itself one sound at a time. Pop, pop, dot, dot. Pop, pop, pop. Dot, dot. A pause. Pop. Dot, dot. We didn't know, when it was happening, that we were living inside something that would become precious. We didn't know, when the sound was filling the house every morning, that mornings could be quiet in a way that was not peaceful, but empty. We didn't know that we were learning the sound of someone's love for us, learning it so thoroughly, so deeply, that it would live in us long after the machines were gone, long after the kitchens had changed, long after the people who made the coffee had gone somewhere we cannot follow. No appliance today makes a sound like that. No appliance today would. We have traded rhythm for silence, percussion for efficiency. The audible conversation between a machine and a household for the mute, anonymous convenience of the automatic. We have gained speed, and we have gained a certain kind of ease, and we have lost the particular morning music that a generation grew up hearing, and now carries inside them like a quiet piece of music they can still hear if they stop and listen. 10. The glass knob has gone dark. The chrome has gone cold. The small red eye of the power indicator has closed. The burned ring on the formica is still there in memory, if not in fact. The permanent record of all the mornings the pot sat in that spot and sang its song. The coffee grounds in the basket have been knocked out into the trash and rinsed away. The stem and the basket have been washed and dried and set aside. The kitchen is quiet now, with the quiet of a later decade, a different morning, a different way of being in the world. But somewhere, in the particular archive that memory keeps for the things that mattered before we understood that they mattered, the percolator is still going. Pop, da, pop, pop, dot, dot, pop, dot, doll. The sound of the day starting. The sound of someone awake. The sound of everything being okay. The sound of home.